everyone, and welcome to another episode of Getting Hammered. I am your host, Mary Katharine Ham. I'm here with my co-host, Vic Mattis of the Washington Free Beacon. I am definitely over-caffeinated and underprepared today. We are moderately right and moderately reliable, your morning show for any hour. We're going to talk about the news, and there is much to talk about, as there is all the time during a Trump administration. But before we get to all the news, international and domestic, let's see what's going on with Vic. How you doing?
Hello, Mary Katharine. I'm doing just fine. I get these emails from the New York Times about, not just, their big, breaking news stuff, but also, quirky stories, interesting stories. This is how they have the edge over the Washington Post. It's just more interesting, and they kind of know what we want to read.
They've A/B tested you.
Yes, they have. So an interesting one came up the other week, which is about weight loss drugs and the impact on the love lives, shall we say, of couples.
Okay.
So this was, I said, well, I'm kind of interested because this is going to be all of a sudden, you lose weight and this thing happens. Mm-hmm. So it turns out in this particular story of this couple, it doesn't actually work out the way you might think it works out. Okay. So the woman, she goes on a drug called Zepbound, which I hadn't even heard of, right? She loses 60 pounds. Now, she had all sorts of health issues, fatty liver, so she had to get on this thing. She loses the 60 pounds. The husband says they have, ever since she had this drastic weight loss, they have yet to be intimate. Because, he says, he misses the old her.
Oh.
He preferred the Rubenesque wife. And he gets into, I don't want to say details, but sort of like the loving, it's like, it's like a giant cushion pillow. I don't know. It's
cushion for the pushing, yes.
Wow.
Sorry,
okay.
everybody.
Well, it is.
We can cut that. We can bleep that.
No, let's not bleep it out. It is the second episode of the week. It's always a little bit more edgy. And that surprised me because I was thinking, imagine if, we may edit this part out. This is just my observation, right? If you had been married to Lizzo, and then one day you wake up and she's Beyonce,
right?
Wouldn't you be like, wow, this is amazing,
Or Beyonce might be like, wow, look at me. Where else shall I shop around?
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's okay. Well,
I know
it's interesting where you went on
You
that.
were really observing the marriage vows part of this.
And you're like,
just
now she's
only how does this work within this unit? And I'm like, hey, they're all going out on the town.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's all. And it got me thinking.
The New York Times definitely knew that story would make you click.
I want to get to, as Ozzy Osbourne would say, the meat and potatoes. And so what it got me thinking is this, right?
Mm-hmm.
My takeaway for our listeners is you can be with somebody and somebody can lose a lot of weight or gain a lot of weight. But when you're with somebody almost every day and it's gradual, you basically don't notice and it just becomes it. If she had lost 60 pounds over a longer period of time, I think he would have been fine saying, oh, my giant
interesting.
Cushion pillow is gone.
The weight loss drugs are too effective.
It was too effective, right?
See, now this is a good metaphor for Doge. Is it just going, it's going too fast and it's going to make everyone uncomfortable.
If they just cut out the comic book.
Yeah, just
the DEI
comic book. Okay, that's interesting.
So isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And then I started thinking about I've been married to Kate for 20 years, and she doesn't look any different than she did in my mind. But maybe she is.
She doesn't look very different. Kate is like a miracle woman. She really doesn't look very different.
There's actually a portrait in the attic. You don't want to go up there. It's actually a portrait of me. And then I thought to myself, maybe this is the same thing. If I decided to just, how somebody grows a mustache or a beard, and if you're with somebody, you don't
grow
actually.
A beard, that would be very sinister.
Yes, it would take about a year. And suddenly they'd be like, oh my gosh, we've been living with Ho Chi Minh all this time. That's it for me, Mary Katharine. What's going on with you?
Deep thoughts.
Yeah.
You know what? That sounds like a story selection for a show like Ruthless.
Oh.
On which I appeared this week on the 500th episode. So congratulations to the fellas.
Congratulations.
A big deal. They had a live performance, and I was there to play Dim or Journo, one of their
that's a great
one of their games.
Yeah.
I did not win that game because that game is very, very hard.
It is depressing.
It's really hard. Like, it's a bunch of, for those of you who don't listen, and you should, there are 4 options, 3 tweets or headlines or lines from journalists and 1 from a Democratic operative. And you have to guess which one is the Democratic operative. And they were wild.
Yeah.
They were wild.
Yeah.
And the one that I picked was like, are Americans just going to accept death and cruelty on a whim of Donald Trump's or on a whim of Elon Musk's? And I was like, that's got to be it, right?
Uh-huh.
No, that was a journalist.
Wow.
Yeah.
You remember who or no?
Ann Applebaum.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sure.
Ann Applebaum also had a story. You saw this headline, right? In the Atlantic. That was like, federal workers are now experiencing what it's like to live under a foreign occupation. And I was like, you and I both thought she was going to make the opposite turn.
Yeah, I agree. She was that close in the headline. I'm like, they're about to realize what it feels like to be like
normal people.
The rest of us.
That wasn't it. That wasn't it, Vic. It was under foreign occupation. And I said, well, to be fair, encountering the American electorate and its desires is very much like meeting a foreign power for the feds.
Yeah,
you know, they're very
right.
unfamiliar with this.
No, that's right.
Oh my goodness. So I had a good time there. I did wear my, actually I have it with me, but I don't have it on because it's too warm in here.
Oh, yes.
But I wore my vintage Daytona 500 jacket. Winston Cup series, okay? No Sprint, no Nextel, no Monster.
Winston,
for me.
Yeah.
I'm from North Carolina in the 80s. Only cigarettes sponsor everything where I come from.
You are alive with pleasure.
Yeah. So I have Winston Cup series jacket as a nod to their 500th episode. Nice. And everybody had a lovely time.
Good.
And just like our live episode, they're just fun.
Yes,
I like.
It's interesting.
I love an audience. Do you guys
interaction? Well, it makes you work harder in some cases.
Yes.
For the get the reaction. What I oftentimes will do, you'll be told if you do public speaking and you're trying to not get nervous, you zero in on somebody who has you have their attention, and then you're just talking to that person, right. And it's a great thing. You
find that friendly face.
I become fixated on the one who is unconvinced.
I was gonna say, do you ever fall on one who's not, and you're like, I do.
Oh, and I'm working on it. I got to get better material out here. Some years ago when the Free Beacon had its podcast Write and Writer, which was people ask me about this, and it's lightning in a bottle because you had all these people at the same time, and it was a crazy time. We did a live podcast at American Enterprise, and that was shocking to the audience. There was a lot of, literally, like jaws drop. and then I was brought in as the lead because I was their legal correspondent at the time, and so I'm making very inappropriate jokes.
Like you do.
And yes, and a woman, I guess they had finished eating or something, and she looked disgusted. And I said to her, I go, "Oh, that wasn't good?" And she's shaking her head.
Like, no, it was not. No, it was not. I was actually on in the first segment and stacking up behind me, because the live show doesn't always go exactly
that's right
on the clock, right? But coming in the door to the green room behind me are Senator Kennedy of Louisiana and Senator Tom Cotton.
Wow.
And I'm like,
and there you are.
I'm like, well, guys, you're just going to have to wait because I got my little jokes to tell on the stage.
That's right. Equal time.
The senators must wait. And then I went out and watched the rest of the show with my friend Joe, who's a listener of both this show and Ruthless. And so I was also surprised by the surprise guest who was Governor Kemp of Georgia.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'd had 2.5 beers, so I was like, go Dogs! And he acknowledged me.
Did he acknowledge?
Mm-hmm.
And he's probably going to run. Everyone is pushing him to
Well, he was asked questions about that, and he was professionally cagey in the way that he should be.
That's a good sign.
He was like, well, he's doing what he needs to do for the people of Georgia right now.
Yeah, that's right. So my focus right now. That's what this is.
Yes, exactly. So that was a good time.
Very nice.
Had a fun time on the way home because what often happens to me when I'm doing public speaking or performance or anything is that I kind of forget to eat before the thing. And this was timed so that it started at about 7:30 or 8. And I maybe had a snack before that. So on the way home, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go through the McDonald's drive-thru.
Oh, man, you're killing me here.
Yeah.
Killing me.
And I didn't just go through the McDonald's drive-thru. I upsized a double quarter pounder with cheese meal.
Never check the calorie count on that
I don't care.
one. No, but you know what?
I don't care.
You're okay.
RFK Jr., don't send me to Gitmo.
Yeah. The double. You know, the double, it's so amazing.
The number of seed oils I consumed last night.
I'm all actually surprised when you go from a single quarter pounder with cheese to a double quarter pounder with cheese, the jump in the calories. It's just one extra patty of beef.
But
Where does it all come from?
The beef calories are good for you.
Yeah,
Why are we mad at that?
Just a little bit of salt. Just a little bit.
It was fantastic. And I went specifically to a McDonald's that I have gone to for many years that never gets orders wrong. Ever.
It's what we would call a flagship.
Yeah, it is a Chick-fil-A style McDonald's, which you don't always get with McDonald's, right? It's a sort of hit and miss. So I go there and I misunderstood the order taker when I got to the window because I was ordering one for Steve too, because Steve wanted to eat a double quarter pounder at midnight as well. And
why not?
Paragons of health, guys.
Yeah, but both of you can afford to.
So I had these two orders, one a meal, one not a meal. You know how that can be. And it seemed like he had misunderstood me, and I only had the one thing. And I momentarily got very nervous that I wasn't going to get my proper order.
Right.
And then it turned out he was on the money as always. And I said, you know what? I'm sorry. I jumped to the conclusion that you might not get that right. And that was wrong of me because you guys always get it right. You nailed it, buddy.
Good for them. Yeah. Take pride.
I love good service. And that place has always given me. I used to get this is how often I went to that McDonald's when I was a single mother of two young children. And it was right down the street from my house at the time. And they always treated us nicely. We'd go eat inside as an adventure sometimes, go through the drive-thru to get our dinners. And Miss Angela was the woman who waited on me at the window every time. And I would get her a gift certificate of some kind for Christmas because Miss Angela was a part of our family.
No, it's like you knew the servers, much like me at the Palm. It's the same thing, really.
Obviously the same thing. Yes, that's where I spent my luxurious lunchtimes at the McDonald's.
When I was a student living abroad in Vienna, Austria, I went through a phase where for a whole week I went to McDonald's every day. But without telling anybody because I was embarrassed to tell people, even my fellow Americans, that I was doing this. And what I had figured out is there are different McDonald's and different Bezirks, as they call them, different zones of the city. Yeah. So Monday I'd go to one in this location, and then Tuesday I'd go to a different location, McDonald's. So they didn't know. Only I knew.
Only you knew. Don't hide it. Don't hide your light under a bushel.
I'm glad you turned this into a biblical thing.
Yeah, people need to see.
That's right.
Be
salt and light.
Proclaim your love.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Shall we do the news?
Let's do it.
We are going to take a step into some very, very sad news because we have updates from Israel that we hoped never to give, which is that the Bibas family, which is Shiri Bibas, the mother, famously captured on video holding her two young boys, Kfir, who was 9 months old when they were abducted, and Ariel, who was 3 or 4.
Yeah.
They did die in captivity. Hamas made a deal that included trading their bodies and the body of an 83-year-old, I believe, Israeli.
In exchange for killers?
In exchange for convicted Palestinians. It's incredibly sad. I knew that it was irrational, probably, to hope that they were alive. Although, because when you kidnap women and children, they become very valuable hostages. I hoped that maybe they were kept somewhere so that they could use them as a bargaining chip, which is evil in and of itself, but at least that they would be alive. So I hoped right up until the end that it wasn't true, particularly because the father, Ariel Bibas, came home, a week and a half ago?
He was held in a separate location.
He was held separately. And the thing that really gets me, and everybody pray for this poor father, is that they were in a safe room on October 7th when Hamas and Gazan civilians came into their town, into their community. He left his wife and kids in the safe room, gave himself up to Hamas, thinking they won't take them,
Right.
they'll have me. Not realizing that, and I believe it's the video shows and others have attested that it was Gazan civilians, many of whom were mixed in with Hamas fighters on that day, who came in and decided to take this mother and 2 babies. And they were held separately. It was not, and it obviously we don't know how their lives ended or what they suffered.
Yeah.
But it is just the saddest, most evil thing. And then in giving back the bodies, they do the propaganda parade again.
Yeah. They're leaning in
with the caskets of small children. I mean, it is, and the Red Cross is facilitating this.
Yes, they are. Yeah, that's right.
The International Red Cross is like, well, here we are at yet another terrorism show.
Right. And mysteriously, they didn't check up on them as they were supposed to with hostages in such situations.
The International Red Cross should never be off the hook for this. At least during the Holocaust, they were checking.
Right.
Now, they were fooled and or happy to turn a blind eye when checking on the camps, right? And said, oh, everything looks fine here. Right. They would see, Germans dressed up as captives and be like, yeah, everybody's signed off.
Right.
They didn't even attempt here. They didn't even attempt.
Yeah.
I saw a Free Press article that was like, no one could confront this particular truth just because it was so unbearably evil.
Yeah.
That everyone was like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
So it makes me wonder, the first thing is Adam Credo in the Washington Free Beacon has also been covering this angle with the International Red Cross.
Mm-hmm.
And there is movement on Capitol Hill, certainly a number of Republicans who are up in arms about, like, why are we funding it? Because they get most of the funding from the United States.
They deserve accountability. We all deserve accountability.
And they could be that they should be sued by families of these victims in some of these circumstances. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it's such a horrible story, and yet I haven't seen much coverage of it on the other networks, and I wonder if it just happens to be that I'm not watching at the right time, or do I get the sense, is it my hunch that it just doesn't serve the narrative, so they're not covering?
Yeah, I think too often with the Palestinian side of this conflict, the idea is if you can't say anything nice, just don't say anything at all.
Right.
And in the case of having kidnapped babies and their mother and slaughtered them,
right,
it's hard to give that a narrative spin.
So here's the other thing, which I find very confusing. When Hamas paraded them, these bodies, and they have the stage, and they have this big backdrop, gigantic wall-sized poster of Bibi Netanyahu looking like a vampire.
I mean, so, the whole thing is so grotesque. It's almost as if it's a little too on the nose.
Yeah, right.
Like vampiric
Jew.
Right. Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Pictured looming over the
bodies.
The bodies in the coffins, and a picture of these people when they were alive in their happy life in Israel that you stole them from and murdered them. And the attempt of this propaganda exhibit was to say that Israel had in fact killed them because
it's written in the backdrop in Arabic, but killed by Zionist warplanes is what they said, right? So they're like, this is a horrible tragedy, and Israel's to blame for these poor people here. Isn't that terrible? By the way, why are we celebrating as we're parading their bodies and saying yay and victory over the bodies?
I mean, how
I'm quite confused, because it's like, this is terrible. By the way, we're happy it was done. So it's like, if they didn't do it, we would have done it ourselves.
So
what?
Also, how can you watch these displays and be like, yeah, we should be neighbors? I think
no.
Yeah, like right next door. You guys want to move in next door?
Yeah,
that's
a two-state solution.
We'd love that.
Right.
We'd love that. We want you right up on the border. No, it's insanity.
It remains in the charter. They want the end of Israel. And there are reasons why a number of these other neighboring countries do not want this influx of Gazans, because I think they're scared of them themselves.
Yes, that
right?
is part of
in
it.
Jordan or in Egypt. It's a radicalized element. You've seen these photos and videos where they brainwash little children from the get-go that the Jew is the enemy, right? There's a line about it, about finding the Jew hiding in the tree or whatever it is, and then wanting to shoot them. And it's in the textbooks and everything.
In the event where they do the propaganda parade, there are children, large numbers of children, out to observe the propaganda parade with the children's caskets. Like that's
right, and
that's what they're there
being
for.
told this is a good thing.
Yes.
No doubt. They're not being told, oh, isn't it horrible that Israel killed these poor kids? No, you know that they're celebrating.
By the way, I should note that the wild Mara Gaza idea from Trump did indeed seem to get Egypt and Jordan to move a little. Seth Mandel wrote for commentary, Egypt and Jordan have gotten the message. The two Arab states that share borders with Palestinian territories want President Trump to know that they are making progress in coming up with an alternative to his Riviera on the Mediterranean plan for Gaza. Trump's refusal to rescind his threat to have the U.S. take ownership of the Gaza Strip, clear the enclave of its residents, and build a world-class development project in its place was aimed at convincing Arab states, especially Egypt, that they needed to provide a tangible plan of their own. Just saying no to taking in displaced Palestinians wasn't going to cut it. Nor would it be sufficient to make vague declarations about how they're thinking about discussing the possibility of considering the development of an alternative plan. Anyway, an Egyptian-led plan is taking some shape. So
again, it's
a little movement.
Let me come up with the most radical, wild, unorthodox, outside-the-box plan to either try to implement it or to shock you out of your old ways, because clearly it hasn't been working in the past, and actually do something.
Shock you out of stasis.
Yes, that should be like their bumper sticker. You got a better plan? That should be it.
Well, and we have been giving lots of aid to Egypt over the years, and this is an administration that the Egyptians could easily look upon and be like, ooh, they might take some of that away because they don't like giving out foreign aid. So I think there's a lot of leverage points here. But yes, I think there's a plan right now for maybe another 6 live hostages to come home. This is a very sad week for Israel where they're digesting this. And I'm gonna use Seth Mandel again on this, but he notes that Kfir, who was the 9-month-old, Kfir's face became a symbol of the conflict because it represented a line that had been crossed and cannot be uncrossed. Members of Congress giddily attended Tintifada demonstrations that were no longer simply pro-Palestine or anti-colonial. They were about defending those who stole Kfir from his home and dragged him to Gaza, where, according to Hamas, he died. And it is impossible for the rest of us to pretend that we didn't see a chunk of society, whether in person or online, rush to cross that line and cheer the people who kidnapped a baby. Kfir became a symbol because he is the answer to every relevant question about this conflict. His case is the war boiled down to its essence. Kfir is the dividing line. In a better world, there'd be no one standing on the wrong side of it.
Yeah.
And
that's it.
Again, I did not want this to be what happened, even though I kind of assumed this is what happened. But Kfir is almost the exact age of my son. So the idea that this child had been taken before, maybe before he could crawl. He was 8 or 9 months old. He was probably just learning.
We talk about this. I talk about this with Kate about how when you have little kids, one of the things you think about constantly is to protect them from the awfulness of the world that exists until they're old enough to then understand it on their own, that this is, a dangerous world with bad actors who are around and terrible things like this happen.
Right.
But you don't want, and so we don't shield them from that now, obviously. They know what the world is like and terrible things that happen. They hear stories in the news or wherever, locally or abroad. But you don't want little children to know that yet. You want them to think that this is a happy place and all there is like, the love of your parents and your siblings. And so it's such a violation. And then you think about the encampments at all these campuses where they were supporting Hamas, right? You think about
tearing down posters of a 9-month-old and a 3-year-old.
Or scrawling swastikas on the pictures of the hostages. And you think about, again, the squad and anybody else who is sympathetic to these people, and you ask them, what do you think about this? And they will still find ways to rationalize and say, well, it's a shame, but it is Israel's fault because they wouldn't have done that. It was their airstrike and they went too far. did they bomb the kibbutz? Is that what they did? Oh no, they were. Why were they there? Did something happen on October 7th?
Yeah, something happened, and I don't think it's that the Bibas children wandered into Gaza.
No, I mean, again, they talk about
that's not
how
what happened.
Gaza, and Trump talks about how Gaza is this, is just a giant, it's a wasteland. It's like leveled. He says it's leveled, right? Unlivable. It wasn't like that on October 6th.
Nope. There are 6 remaining live hostages who will come home hopefully on Saturday. So
I mean, it's clear. Obviously, people have talked about this, and I think we've talked about it on the show. When Trump says that all hell breaking loose, it's not him moving the 6th Fleet into position and then launching cruise missiles. It's about letting Israel do whatever it wants to do, and particularly after this, it has to discuss the president. It should discuss a lot of people.
Yeah,
everyone.
Again, I don't know how you look at any of that and go, let's be neighbors again.
Or dealing, or trying to negotiate with these people.
I mean, this is why it's impossible.
You're negotiating with terrorists.
And by the way, I think you can too easily overlook this part, but it is another part of the psychodrama and awfulness for Israel, is that when you're trading in such a small country, when you're trading hundreds of people who have committed terrorist acts in Israel back to the neighbors that you're about to move in again next to, or move them right next to your border, you're releasing people who are guilty of having killed your friends and family.
Yeah.
There are many people in Israel and here who have relatives who died at the hands of the people you are now releasing. For the bodies, not even live in this exchange, of Israeli children.
And they were sealed. Remember this? They had to break the locks in order to get positive ID and try to figure out what happened. And it's just
brutal. It's brutal. Okay. But I will be obviously praying for those families who will get live hostages home. That's the thing about this, and why it must be so much worse exponentially to be in Israel, because it's two intense emotions at the same time of, oh my gosh, I can't believe we have to do this and we're doing it. And empowering these monsters and sending people back. And also we're grieving, and also it's a miracle that anyone comes home. Yeah. So we will keep our eye on it, but that was the news I hoped never to deliver. Yeah. I hoped there would be better. Yeah. It is a funny thing in this business too, when you get to have children who are tween or teen age, and I know your kids, they take in a lot of news at this point, but mine are sort of on that edge where they don't hear a ton of news. And the way we consume news is so different now, so that I used to watch the news with my dad, like the evening news, or we would get newspapers and I would just glance at the newspapers. So I kind of got a little tidbits here and there. My dad was a newspaper man, so we had a lot of news in the house. But my kids, they can go through a day unless I'm listening to a podcast. I guess that would be their snippet, right? Sure. They would hear the news that way. They probably hear J-Pod on commentary telling them about the news. But it's a weird moment when you get asked a question and you have to decide, how much evil am I going to reveal to my kid in this moment?
It's a bad thing.
Yeah, and you don't know what the right amount is, right? And it can be
it's it's not necessarily dependent on age, because
maturity can be part of it.
They take it different ways.
And I don't mean to I'm going to stress out all the parents, but there is a thing where you can't get it back. It's a toothpaste out of the tube thing. Yes. Because the idea that children could be kidnapped and killed might not be an idea that your child ever had before. Right. Right? Right. And then you have to maybe talk about that. So I always put it in the context of prayers for these families and that kind of thing, to give them a little bit of balancing. But
my friend from college, Peter Lowe, told me when he was in kindergarten, had somehow managed to hear the story of the Manson murders.
Oh, geez.
And then he was obsessed with it. And then he told other kids in his kindergarten class what happened. And then the teacher had to be, intervene and talk to the parents, okay, your son's been talking about this horrible thing,
I feel like kidnapping in the 80s was like kind of a thing that people
thought
about a lot. And there was a wave of
Absolutely.
that in the early 80s, or at least there was a wave of very publicized.
Right. Well, yeah, there and I still remember those because a number of those the ones that ended badly.
Yes, the milk carton kids. Like this was a thing
Adam Walsh,
that people
Eats and
worried
Pats.
about.
I still
and
remember that.
Eaton Pats, that's the one that was one of the first big ones. So this was a thing that was talked about and publicized, but I definitely had a fear of like some stranger coming and taking me.
Yeah.
That when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was like, oh yeah, definitely someone could just come in this window. That's obviously going to happen.
Because I'm an old person, but also an old soul. When I was very young, I saw some documentary on HBO because of course we had HBO and there were a lot of good shows, but there's also stuff that were really interesting. And
I just want to pause for a second and say that not only did Vic's Danish cookie tins have cookies in them, he had HBO.
We were living large.
This is... Had I gone to Vic's house in the 80s, I would have been
my gosh,
blown away.
I remember, okay, so two things. One, before we get into a very dark thing.
I bet you had Capri Suns in the fridge waiting for you.
Capri Suns are great, yes. And McCain Elio's pizza. They call them pizza pockets, I think. You come home from high school, pop it in. No, there was. I learned as a kid about the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh's baby, and it's such a dark story.
Oh yeah,
and of course it remains. I mean, it's something that's like it was a JFK assassination before the JFK assassination, where you can go into a deep dive about conspiracy theories regarding it, and I did. And man, as a kid, I was just like horrified by this thing and how it ended, because you didn't expect the ending to be that way.
Did we put a content warning on this one?
Oh, it's too late. Yeah, well, I'll leave it at, I'm not getting into details, but anyway, it just reminded me of that.
By the way, did you see that on the SNL 50th
on a lighter note, yes,
Black Jeopardy sketch, which included something that a lot of people have been outraged over, which is they kind of shortened the sketch and used the Tom Hanks MAGA character.
I have thoughts on that, but please continue.
We can talk about it.
Yeah.
But in the beginning of that sketch, Kenan Thompson kicks it off. Special shout out to our sponsors: a plate, a tin full of Danish butter cookies, or a sewing kit.
Yeah, you decide. You have to find out.
I was like, we just did that joke 2 days ago.
Kate's convinced somebody watched the podcast, a writer, and then entered it into the skit. Because it just happened. And
the question is, okay, so this is actually the theme of Black Jeopardy, is because that was the very clever 2016 version. Yeah. With Tom Hanks.
That was an amazing
playing
skit.
MAGA Doug. Is his name Doug?
Doug.
That was a great sketch, because what it said was basically that our politics is a class divide.
Yes.
Not a racial divide.
That's right.
They had Black folks and white MAGA folks agreeing about a bunch of social issues, a bunch of conspiracy theories, and it was incisive and smart. And then they brought that back for the 50th and did not execute it well.
No, they did not execute it well
because they didn't have the common ground part. They just treated Doug as a standalone character.
Despite the fact that more blacks and Hispanics voted for Trump this time than last time.
Actually, MAGA Doug and the Black Jeopardy sketch is a preview of the 2024 win for Trump. Right?
That's right.
What he realized is that we have a class divide, not necessarily a racial divide. And he spoke to the people who shared that class of all races. Yeah. And that's how he won the election. So I'm not outraged about MAGA Doug on the 50th.
People are about 2.0 MAGA Doug. So in other words, the one that we just saw for the 50th anniversary.
Yes. Because they do a gag where he's like, he doesn't shake Kenan Thompson's hand because he's afraid he's there to rob him.
That's right.
That gag was also in the original, but the original had a redemptive arc. Yeah. The original had more to it. I will say the most important part about the SNL 50th Black Jeopardy was Eddie Murphy playing
Tracy Morgan.
It was so good.
People forget how well Eddie Murphy does impressions.
Eddie Murphy,
a lot of people,
at his best, cannot be beat. Right? I mean, he is just amazing.
He did a skit once of the Honeymooners. Yeah, but that they were gay, and I can't get into it more than that with Ralph and So anyway. Ralph Cramden, and anyway, that's the first thought. The second thing is with the Tom Hanks appearance at the end. To me, it felt very rushed. Yes, and the material itself is a short bit, and it was kind of mailed in, And I don't think Hanks probably spent that much time rehearsing it because he had a few lines. It was a little bit shaky. And again, the outrage was, they did a skit where the Trump supporter doesn't want to shake a black guy's hand. But no, as you mentioned in the previous iteration, he thought he was going to be like, which is okay, fine in and of itself. But it's different than I don't want to shake hand. And when he realizes it, he goes, okay. Then he shakes his hand. So
again, it did not have the redemptive arc where you learn that these people have something in common.
That's right.
But I forgive everything for really hot Eddie Murphy. Like Eddie Murphy on his game. I'm just like, I'm here for it.
Again,
also, that dude's like 70.
That's crazy.
He looks great.
He looks great. If you get a chance to see his bit on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld, Eddie Murphy does a Sammy Davis Jr. impression.
Oh, really?
That is has me doubled over.
He's fantastic.
Doubled over.
All right. Back to sadder news after SNL 50. Ukraine. Yeah, there's a lot going on with our leaders and Ukraine. First of all, I will read a Donald Trump truth. You ready? Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't Sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization? In that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us. We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is, quote, missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast, or he is not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something I'll admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried, Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. What do you think of this foreign policy?
I'm not sure where to begin, Mary Katharine. I just had to remind myself that at least we don't have paper straws. No, I mean, there's more than that. He's done more than that, women in sports and things and
I think
and whatnot. And
John Podhoretz said when we're assessing the Trump administration, there will be good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah, like the facts of life. You take the good, you take the bad.
Yes.
That's right.
And he said, this is the ugly.
Yeah.
That's the thing to me is you can definitely make the intellectual argument that throwing more money at this is not going to succeed in the ways that you want it to succeed. Perhaps it could have earlier if you had given the right weapons at the right time. It was always an uphill battle. It is tragic that, in particular, millions of Ukrainians have died defending what was their sovereign nation that Russia came into, starting the war.
Right. Russia
started the war. Ukraine did not start the war, although he keeps implying that they did, or just straight up saying that they did. They did not. Make the argument that we're not going to continue to do this in the same way, that Europe needs to step up, that whatever. That doesn't mean that you have to say Russia didn't start the war.
So I had to double check on that because he does give this, was taking questions from the press.
Right.
Trump was. So this is not the interview that he does with Elon on Sean Hannity's show.
Right.
I think this was before that, at least before it was aired, I should say. And the line that struck me was this, and this is a quote word for word. He's talking about Zelensky. You've been there for 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. You should have never started it. Started what?
They didn't start it.
And
that's just a fact.
That's a rewrite. You're retconning. Is that what they call it? Retconning?
Yeah, retconning.
Is it because he had just gotten off the phone or he was talking to Putin and it was still fresh in his mind that Putin told him they started it first?
I actually wonder if that was it. And Zelensky has been objecting because Russia and America are talking about how to end this war and he's not involved. Fair. Yeah. You should be concerned about that. Yeah. I would be concerned about that as the leader of that country. That country, it is correct. He was elected for a 5-year term or something.
And it's been suspended because they're in a war footing.
Because they are on a war footing, and many people are out of the country, by the way. Holding election would be very hard. Of all the countries that have not done elections on a regular basis, to have this one as your target, I'm not sure is a sincere belief in like election integrity.
Yeah.
I think that long ago when he called Zelensky and said and got impeached over that phone call.
Yeah. Stuck with him.
It stuck with him.
Yeah.
It stuck with him that Zelensky wouldn't root out Biden corruption, which is legit. It's real.
As it turned out.
I think he's mad about that.
Yeah.
I think he was always disinclined to support this particular fight for Western values.
Yeah.
Israel he's fine with. This one different.
Yes.
There's always been a divide here. Zelensky, who has been very good at meeting with the right people, making the right arguments, convincing people to stand with his people. And the people of Ukraine have been very good at standing up for themselves to make the argument that like we're worth using some treasure to uphold or to back up. He made a very bad decision, given that Trump might end up the president, when he went on the trail in Pennsylvania with Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Why did he do that? I could have told you how that would play out.
Yeah. He'd remember that.
That he would definitely remember that one.
Yeah. And you can tell because, when he issues these, used to be tweets and now truths, he gets in as many digs as possible in the forms of adjectives and adverbs. And one of them was the modestly successful, comedian. He wanted to say more than that.
Well, and it's not to say that is what should govern Trump's decisions on this. It shouldn't, but we have a pretty clear understanding of Trump.
Right.
Given that, seemingly, and I know they say they just like visited an arms, factory, but it was during the election.
Right.
You were on the trail with the vice president who was running against Trump, who was already disinclined to like you.
They were going to use him as a prop.
It wasn't a great decision.
No.
And I have no doubt, provoked some of this.
Yes. It also puts many of Trump's advisors, people who we like very much, in a little bit of an awkward situation here. Well, there's Vice President J.D. Vance, but of course, Vance had always been skeptical of Ukraine and was famously quoted as saying that he didn't care about it at the time. But then you always have National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and, of course, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and them having to deal with Russian counterparts. There are two very powerful countries, three if you include China, and historically we have had to deal with them and not just, give them the same treatment that we would give to North Korea as a pariah state, as it's not a hermit kingdom, right? So we have to deal with them. But at the same time, you have to recognize and, react to certain actions that they did that are unconscionable, like the invasion of another country, meaning Ukraine. So Mike Walls was on Fox this morning, and I thought it was very interesting. Brian Kilmeade from Fox and Friends interviews him. And I think Walls was not expecting some tough questions. And Kilmeade, to his credit, asked him a few questions that you could tell just threw off Waltz just slightly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Kilmeade mentions, he did it in the form of critics are concerned about X.
Right.
But there were legitimate concerns that he brings up. He mentioned the 20,000 or so, Ukrainian children that were moved into Russia, that were, separated from their families. Did Trump talk about that?
Right.
And you can tell Waltz was not pleased that was
that he's getting that question.
And Waltz had to hammer home, look, we gave them a great offer. We were going to invest in Ukraine, and that's a pretty good idea, as well as, in exchange, the rare earth minerals and the whole deal. And they turned it down. It was that was their mistake. J.D. Vance's response, of course, was to say that, Zelensky's rebuff of Trump was, I think he called it atrocious remarks or something. It's not going to win over Trump. And that's accurate.
Strategically, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
You can wish that you have a different partner to deal with, but you don't. Scott Bessent the Treasury Secretary went to Ukraine, met with Zelensky, and Trump said that Bessent actually went there and was treated rather rudely because essentially they told him no, and Zelensky was sleeping and unavailable to meet him. Trump said on Air Force One this week. There's a picture of them meeting. Like they met.
I don't. Yeah.
And as our friend Jim Garrity notes, and this is a thing that bothered me about Biden, is that so far in the second term, he's been way tougher on Zelensky than he has been on most declared foes of the United States of America. When Trump sweet talks some brutal dictator, he always insists it's necessary for good relations. By the way, I'm willing to listen to some of that. Right. Speaking of Kim Jong-un, Trump said on the campaign trail last year, it's a good thing to get along, not a bad thing. What compels Trump to be nicest and most eager to please with the foreign leaders who hate us and seek to undermine us, and so irrationally, reflexively hostile and combative with pro-Western democratic allies? And my answer is, he just doesn't like Zelensky.
Yeah, no,
he doesn't freaking like
more
Zelensky.
Personal. I kind of, I keep on thinking, tell me there's some sort of 3D chess element going on over here. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, and maybe this is why. He's harder on allies and sweet talking. Does the sweet talking actually work? Look.
It doesn't, it's never really seemed to.
Yes, with Xi Jinping and with Kim Jong-un.
There is a part of this where Europe and sort of anti-Trump forces here join together and say, let's super own Trump by taking care of our own security in the future.
And inadvertently.
And Trump's like, oh no, don't do that.
Right. And then problem
solved. That's not what we want you to do at all.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things. Look, I know that Ukraine has gotten tons of money and equipment from us, but no Americans have died there.
Right.
And so it's a difference.
Right. There's an accountability. There are concerns for accountability of where the money goes, because it's not, giant transport ships of our equipment going directly to Ukraine, as it turns out. Right. It's very roundabout.
I think there are concerns. And I think there's an intellectually honest way to be like, let's get to the bottom of that. And what is a realistic version of how this does end at some point? I think that's a real conversation. You shouldn't be not allowed to have that conversation, or else you're a Russian stooge.
Yeah.
But he goes the extra step and is like, but, and also Putin started. And also Vladimir Zelensky started it. No, he did not. No, he did not.
And again, I get it. You have to deal with these very powerful forces. You have to have some sort of relationship in order for the larger good of global stability.
Yeah.
Right. And FDR dealing with Joseph Stalin, who is a mass murderer.
Right.
But you can do it in different ways. FDR really liked, I think, Stalin and gave him a free hand when it came to figuring out after Yalta and giving up the rest of Eastern Europe to Uncle Joe. Mm-hmm. And Truman was much tougher.
Yeah.
You could be Truman.
Yeah.
You don't have to be FDR.
Team Truman. Oh, we want to play that Karen Bass clip.
Yes. Okay. What's happening?
We've done some very serious stuff, and this remains a serious issue. But this clip is quite funny. Let's see.
This is Fox's LA affiliate.
Local Fox affiliate interviewing Karen Bass.
I'm going to go to Ghana, which I know you've said was a mistake now. But I just am curious on the thought process behind it.
Right.
Because we know that there was warnings about the weather before you went, and you still went. What was the thought process behind going to Ghana?
So let me just tell you a couple of things. First of all, when the White House called and asked me if I would represent the president, I said yes. It was going to be a very, very short trip, over a weekend and 2 business days. We need to look at everything about the preparation and all of that for the fires, because I think when we evaluate that, we will find that although there were warnings that I frankly wasn't aware of, although there were warnings, I think our preparation wasn't what it typically is, meaning that before there's a major weather event, for example, last week when we knew we were going to get into the rains, you saw us come together and us talk about, get your sandbags, bring the K-rails out. That type of preparation didn't happen. If that had, I will tell you, Alex, I wouldn't have even gone to San Diego, let alone leave the country.
But what do you mean there were warnings you weren't aware of? Because I know we were talking about it on the news. A lot of people were talking about the problems, warning that this was going to be a huge deal.
So when I talked about it with the fire chief, what she said is that we have warnings of Santa Ana winds a lot, but predicting this, and you saw, from the city, from the county, that level of preparation really didn't happen. So it didn't reach that level to me to say something terrible could happen and maybe you shouldn't have gone on the trip.
Why didn't it
But to
happen?
me, I don't know. I mean, I think that that's one of the things we need to look at. So 2 investigations are taking place. One internal to the city, and that's the Fire Commission, because that's mandated by the city charter. So the commission will hire an outside entity to examine everything, the pre-deployment, why were firefighters sent home, all of that should have taken place that didn't. And then also the governor has contracted with the Fire Safety Research Institute, which is a national institute that investigated what happened in the fires in Maui. So everything that happened, including that, needs to be examined. But I will tell you that I felt absolutely terrible not being here for my city and not being here for my family, who was impacted by the fires as well. And so when I say it was a mistake, absolutely, the idea that I was not present was very painful.
Woo.
That was a long-winded response that could have been shortened to, why didn't somebody tell me this was going to be a big deal?
She, by the way, when she was running, promised not to travel internationally. I like that she starts with,
The president
when the
asked me.
president asked me,
Yeah. Well, then you can't say no.
what am I to do?
Right.
And then she spends 2 minutes saying, I didn't know, I was unaware.
Mm-hmm.
How could I have known? I'll investigate who let me go on this trip.
Yeah. It was. I'm not gonna lie to you. It was a mistake. I'll find out who made that mistake.
Yeah. We'll
on my
get to the
behalf.
bottom of that.
There's a line that the comedian George Lopez talks about where a friend asks another friend, "Hey, are you free right now? What are you doing right now? Nothing. Oh, good. Maybe you can help me with my car. Oh, you mean now?
No.
I thought you meant like wow later. Now. It's the same thing. Oh, you mean there's a fire warning? Oh, you mean no? There's like a real fire warning. And in fact, the National Weather Service had issued, and this is like 2 days before she left. It was, quote, extreme fire weather conditions. And then the day before she left, it was upgraded to major risk. But that's not enough, apparently.
Well, it just didn't filter up. And
Yeah.
I love that her argument is like, it didn't filter up to her.
No.
The reason it didn't filter up to her is because the people under her weren't doing the preparations they should have been doing, at which point she might have heard that people were doing preparations, and that would have made her think that this would be a big deal.
Look,
That's so embarrassing.
I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to blame the fire chief, Kristen Crowley. I'm just saying she's below me, and people below me are to blame.
By the way, she was on the short list for Joe Biden's VP.
Yes, she was. Yes, she was, because, again, Joe Biden set out these parameters.
He did.
That were focused less on merit, because as
than being a black woman from
yes,
California.
because as we were told,
It's
merit
basically
is
the thing.
merit is racism. But again, it's such a horrible response.
Good. By the way, good on this reporter who is persistent and extremely
Alex.
polite, and gets her to say some outlandish stuff. So well done to him. And I saw some snap polling the other day that are, shortly in the aftermath of these fires, that Rick Caruso would definitely win.
Yeah,
At this point, if he were to face off with Karen Bass again, he might not be so lucky. She might be, shuttled off the stage.
Yeah, she might leave earlier.
Before that happens. Okay, so Karen Bass doesn't know how to take responsibility. What else do we have?
New York City. Are we paying or are we not paying?
Yeah.
At the moment, I think you are. During the prime hours of a weekday, you want to drive into the city. So we're not talking about I don't know if this counts as the tunnel price if you're going over the tunnel or the bridge, but entering into the city for if you're out of state will cost you $9 in, $9 out at a minimum. At a minimum. And you're thinking about suppliers, meat suppliers, food suppliers, any suppliers going into one of the largest cities in the world.
Right.
They don't all live down the street from each other. They come from Westchester, upstate, New Jersey, Connecticut, and beyond. And they've all had to either pay the price, costing them a lot more money, these small businesses, or they have to come at 2 a.m., 4 a.m.
Right. And it's obviously a regressive tax, because people who can absorb $9 to $15 to drive into the city can just do that. But many who can't have to figure out how to deal with that. I thought when they passed the congestion pricing and I heard about it, I was like, gosh, liberals really do have a way of seemingly overnight, and I'm sure there was like a long process that went into this, or a long campaign that went into it, but seemingly overnight you'll hear about some outlandish major change to your life that is brought to you by some urban planner in New York City. Who's like, oh, well, yeah, now you have to pay $13 to go to your job every day. And they're like, what? When did that happen? So I thought it was like a huge drastic change. I was surprised they went through with it. Now the Trump administration is saying, y'all can't do this. I believe it's coming from the Department of Transportation.
Yeah, it would be Sean Duffy.
Representative Nicole Maliotakis, who is a Republican from New York, she said she had spoken to President Trump about congestion pricing in the past, and he promised to make stopping it a priority if he was elected. He obviously cares about New York City a lot. As a New Yorker, he understands how this tax hurt residents, small businesses, and New York City's economy. Thank you, Mr. President. Can they do this?
Well, it's in the courts now.
I don't think they can do that.
Governor Hochul.
I don't like the congestion pricing, but I'm not sure, having voted for their policy as New Yorkers and their representatives, if you can then say to that city from the federal government, nah, y'all can't do that.
It depends. I mean, it's unclear to me if it takes two to make this happen, and one decides that they're not going to do it, then it maybe doesn't happen.
Is that because the toll collecting happens on some federal roads as well as some?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, maybe. Yeah. I could be wrong. We'll be fact checked on this, I'm sure. But the other thing is, I love how they're fighting back about wanting to pay more. You know, for Governor Hochul.
So someone notes that DOT had to give approval for this scheme and did so under Biden, so they are rescinding approval under Trump. This is the problem with executive power.
Yes.
It's just, if the Department of
Transportation, like an ABC special in the morning.
That's my
with conjunction.
That's my local my local reporting.
That's good
thing that I do. Is that if this just switches from administration to administration, it is chaotic, and your local elected leaders should have powers to give you some sort of policy, even if it's a bad one.
Yeah.
And that you had some consistency there.
Right. Yeah. So.
And then Donald Trump called himself a king or something. I don't care.
Yes, that's right. And then she fed right off of that and said, "We haven't been ruled by a king in over 200 years."
By the way, this is the same Governor Hochul who's trying to remove the elected mayor of New York City.
Well, she's a queen.
Well,
it turns out that's okay.
Apparently, the New York State Constitution does give her some powers to, quote, present the charges that face a mayor and give him some sort of due process in figuring that out. She didn't decide to do that when he was indicted. She decided to do that when he started working with Donald Trump on immigration stuff. And yet another example of Trump being so lucky in his opponents, because I'm pointing at this Eric Adams thing and being like, that's bad. You shouldn't give up your sort of like reputation and credibility for convictions and for indictments to earn the help of this guy who's like kind of a wounded Democratic mayor. And then Governor Kathy Hochul's like, hold my authoritarian beer. Guess what I will do? Right. Let me just remove him.
Yeah.
She's discussing whether to do it. She's not sure whether she wants to because it might alienate black voters and it might empower Andrew Cuomo, what she doesn't want to do, who wants to run for mayor. Anyway, this is another casualty of or another issue within a Trump administration, is that we do a lot of talking about New York because Trump wants to talk about New York.
Yeah, he wants to talk about New York, and as much as he hates New York and he left New York, he is a New Yorker.
He is.
You can take the New Yorker out of New York. But...
Yeah. All right, we got to shut it down because I got to pick up my kid.
Okay.
All right.
Mary Katharine, I have one quick prop.
Okay, yes.
You mentioned McDonald's.
Yes.
Right? At the airport in Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
It was a mob scene. I wanted to go to Salt Lake because I couldn't go to the real Salt Lake, but with all these plane delays because of weather and other things, did not get a chance to. It was too crowded. Ended up checking out a place called Fly Right.
Okay.
RITE. I love Chick-fil-A. Mm-hmm. It's great. Fly Right is a version of Chick-fil-A. Huh. They do spicy chicken.
Okay.
You know, hot chicken.
I'm listening.
You know.
Okay.
It was good. It was good. But then I got a side of fries. And they're called Sidewinder fries.
Okay.
This is an airport, by the way, location. This is not technically a flagship. It's usually kind of crazy and busy. The Sidewinder fries were so good. They were like one of my, it ranked up there. It was like some of the best fast food fries I've ever had. They are sort of reminiscent of steak fries because they're thick, but they are, the ones that we got had a little bit of that crispness on the outside and the fluffiness on the inside. It was great.
I'm unable to find a picture of these fries, and it's annoying.
Yes,
me.
and they're
But
they're kind of twisted. They're twisty in the spirit of Arby's, but not thin like that. They're
interesting. Oh yeah, they look like kind of like pork rinds. Actually,
yes, and they
like.
are amazing.
Okay, I'm open to that.
So thank you, Fly Right. That wraps up this episode of Getting Hammered. Remember, you can subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, and you can follow me on Twitter at Victorina Mattis.
I'm at MKHammer on X, at MKHammerTime. On Instagram, you can follow the show at Getting Hammered Podcast on YouTube and Instagram. And also, last night I had an idea when I had 2.5 beers, and that was, why don't we call a community note on X an X post facto?
Wow.
I tagged Elon Musk on that one. If I'm ever getting retweeted, it's for that.
You need to copyright that.
X post facto. I was proud. All right. Thanks for getting hammered responsibly. This has been a Nebulous Media Podcast.